Okay. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. My name is Larry Rousseau. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress. Je suis le vice-président exécutif du Congrès du travail du Canada. Et je crois que le titre qui m'apparaît le plus apte pour qu'est-ce que nous vivons en ce moment, c'est que les coupes, ça fait mal aux gens. Budgets and budget cuts hurt people. Nous avons des dizaines de milliers de travailleurs dans le secteur de l'acier et de l'automobile qui perdent ou qui vont perdre leurs emplois, et dans d'autres secteurs qui seront touchés par le ralentissement économique. C'est vraiment pas le temps de couper des dizaines de jobs dans le secteur public. C'est le monde qui livre ces services dont tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes ont besoin. The budget really reads like austerity. And Canada's unions refuse to let workers pay the price. The government wants to cut tens of thousands of public service jobs. This will mean longer EI waits, slower passports, fewer safety inspections, food inspections, delays for seniors and families, and my colleagues will talk more about that. You do not modernize services by gutting them. And I cannot believe that I heard this morning from the Prime Minister that same old about doing more with less. It didn't work 30 years ago, it didn't work 20 years ago, and it's not going to work today. So workers and families need support, not service cuts and layoffs. To balance the books, start with closing tax loopholes and corporate tax giveaways. The capital gains did not have to be adjusted. That's going to really help the top 10% of earners. The middle class tax cuts, the top 10% of Canadian earners will get more as an average tax cut than the 80% of earners in this country. That's tax cuts for the upper class. The labor movement will fight any attack on public services and workers' rights, and that's why we're here. We need investment in people. We need investment in good jobs, in good, strong, quality public services. Le gouvernement veut abolir des milliers de postes, mais écoutez, ça veut dire plus d'attente pour l'assurance-emploi, pour les passeports, moins d'inspections dans les aliments aussi, des services plus lents pour les familles et les aînés. Nous approchons une crise économique. Techniquement, nous y sommes. C'est pas le temps, quand le secteur privé fait mal, de couper et de faire mal au secteur public. Où seront les consommateurs? Où seront les acheteurs? C'est bien beau de demander aux entreprises d'investir, mais s'il n'y a pas de marché, s'il n'y a pas d'acheteurs, si on est en récession, il n'y en aura pas d'investissement. Merci beaucoup. On prendra les questions tout à l'heure.
Good morning. My name is Sharon DeSousa, and I'm the National President for the Public Service Alliance of Canada. People in Canada elected this government to make life more affordable, but the deep public service cuts announced in yesterday's budget will do the exact opposite. They'll make life harder for everyday people. We've seen the same tired story before, first under Chrétien and then under Harper. They cut tens of thousands of workers, and then they are forced to hire them back again when public services fall apart. That means the services and programs people rely on are going to be slashed. It means longer wait times for your passport, employment insurance, childcare benefits, and pensions. More unanswered calls at Canada Revenue Agency, and weaker public health and food safety programs. And we know how to fight back. We've done it before, and we'll do it again, from coast to coast to coast. Prime Minister Carney talks a lot about sacrifices, but who's actually making those sacrifices? It's not the mega corporations and CEO. No, once again, it's ordinary working people who will bear the brunt. And these cuts won't just hurt workers, they'll slow down the government. You can't build Canada strong while cutting the workers who power this country. Fewer public service workers is also bad for business. Fewer people processing patents, managing supply chains, or supporting economic development. Our own polling backs what we've been saying. Canadians don't want reckless public service cuts. They know public services are already strained to the breaking point, and they want to talk to a real person, not a chat box. We're also deeply concerned about the government's move to unilaterally change federal labor laws. Workers have fought hard for the right to strike and bargain freely. And make no mistake, we will fight these cuts and protect constitutional rights of workers across this country. At the end of the day, budgets are about priorities, and this budget makes it clear. Carney's government is choosing cuts over care, profit over people, and everyone in Canada will pay the price. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être ici. Je m'appelle Silas, je suis le vice-président exécutif national de l'Alliance de la fonction publique du Canada. Aux dernières élections fédérales, les gens ont voté pour un gouvernement qui leur rendrait la vie plus abordable. Mais le budget d'hier va dans l'autre sens complètement. Au lieu d'aider la majorité des Canadiennes et Canadiens, ce budget va leur rendre la vie plus difficile. Des dizaines de milliers de travailleuses et travailleurs de la fonction publique fédérale vont perdre leur emploi en raison de ce budget. Et ça va avoir un impact direct et dévastateur sur les services à la population. On parle d'attentes sans fin pour obtenir un passeport, l'assurance-emploi, l'allocation pour enfants ou le régime de pension. Des programmes de santé publique et d'inspection des aliments qui seront affaiblis. Et encore plus de difficultés à rejoindre l'Agence du revenu. Des conversations frustrantes et sans compassion avec un robot plutôt qu'une vraie personne qui est là pour aider. Et en bout de ligne, ce budget mènera un gouvernement qui n'est pas là quand la population en a besoin. Le premier ministre Carney répète qu'on doit faire des sacrifices. Mais c'est qui? C'est qui va devoir faire des sacrifices? C'est certainement pas les grandes corporations multinationales, ni les banquiers ou les PDG. C'est encore aux travailleuses et travailleurs qu'on demande de sacrifier. Et couper ces postes, ça va aussi reculer les grands projets du gouvernement fédéral. On ne peut pas bâtir un Canada fort en affaiblissant la fonction publique du Canada et en se débarrassant des personnes qui font le travail. Moins de fonctionnaires, ça aura un impact extrêmement négatif sur notre économie dans plusieurs secteurs et dans plusieurs communautés. On parle de moins de gens pour traiter les demandes de brevets, gérer des chaînes d'approvisionnement et faire les évaluations environnementales. La FPC, on a mené un sondage auprès de la population en septembre. Ce qui est ressorti clairement, c'est exactement ce qu'on dit, ça fait des mois. La majorité du public ne veut pas que le gouvernement Carney mette la hache au service public. Ce que la population veut, c'est que le gouvernement rende la vie plus abordable, pas qu'il coupe des emplois et des services à la population. De plus, ce qui nous préoccupe aussi, c'est que le gouvernement parle de changer les lois de travail dans la fonction publique fédérale. Les travailleuses et travailleurs ont dû se battre pour avoir le droit de faire la grève et de négocier collectivement. Si le gouvernement Carney pense que la FPC et les syndicats du Canada vont les laisser nous enlever nos gains, il va voir que ça ne marche pas de même. Il va comprendre que ça ne marche pas de même. Un budget, c'est une question de priorité. Dans ce cas-ci, le message est clair. Le gouvernement Carney a choisi de couper plutôt que de penser aux travailleuses et travailleurs et aux services à la population. Autrement dit, il a choisi de placer l'argent avant la population. Et ce sont les Canadiens et Canadiennes qui vont payer le prix. Merci.
Good day, I'm Sean O'Reilly, President of the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, PIPS. We stand in solidarity with everyone who dedicates their careers to the public service, the scientists, engineers, public health professionals, wildlife analysts, drug patent researchers, and so many more critical professionals delivering essential services to the Canadian public. Tens and thousands of these workers will now lose their jobs as a result of this budget. We are all alarmed by the scale of these cuts. This budget does not target inefficiencies. It hollows out the very systems that Canadians rely on, from food safety to emergency preparedness and digital security. These impacts are going to be hard and fast. Ce budget ne s'attaque pas aux inefficacités. Il vide de leur substance les systèmes sur lesquels comptent les populations. Qu'il s'agisse de la sécurité alimentaire, des interventions d'urgence ou de la sécurité numérique. Ces effets vont se faire sentir solidement et rapidement. This budget made a vague commitment toward a modest cut in outsourcing, but the numbers don't add up. The government's own estimates show spending of $26 billion on contracting out this year, the highest on record. The fact is the government has still chosen to defund many public services while still investing in private consulting firms to do the work of public servants. If this government truly wants to make some deep cuts, it should start by going after the $26 billion, a record high in spending this year alone. So-called efficiency can't come at the expense of safety, stability, and public services that hold this country together and keep us strong, especially at this juncture where Canadians are seeking reassurance and support more than ever before. La soi-disant efficacité ne peut pas se faire au détriment de la sécurité, de la stabilité des services publics qui assurent la cohésion de notre pays, surtout en cette période où les Canadiennes et Canadiens ont plus que jamais besoin d'être rassurés et soutenus. We are calling on members of Parliament to look closely at what's being cut and who will pay the price. We are asking MPs not to simply rubber stamp this budget, but to ask the hard questions of exactly who's going to suffer when these cuts happen. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nathan Prier. I'm the president of the Canadian Association of Professional Employees, or CAPE. Yesterday's budget was nearly 500 pages and still fell very short on some fairly crucial details. We know they want to cut the public service by 40,000 jobs, and they want to cut almost $60 billion in programs to Canadians. And what does that mean exactly? Which programs and services are they sacrificing to make that happen? Who exactly is going to do the work to deliver on the big commitments they just made to Canadians, which includes opening up entire new offices like Build Canada Homes? Comment le gouvernement compte-t-il concilier sa promesse de mettre fin à ce régime de privilèges où l'on paie les consultants 25% de plus que les fonctionnaires pour le même travail? Ces détails n'étaient pas dans ce que nous avons vu hier. Et ce n'est probablement pas un hasard. Soit le gouvernement ne sait pas encore comment il va s'y prendre, soit il n'est pas prêt à dire aux Canadiens ce qu'il s'apprête à leur enlever. And to be clear, we spend less proportionally now on public servants than we did under Stephen Harper. We spent about 10% of the operating budget on public servants under Trudeau, and we spent about 14% under Harper. And that shocks most people when they hear that, given how often public servants get scapegoated for a deficit that is actually caused by governments not squaring their big promises with their big tax cuts for the rich. What we're actually discussing here is gutting programs and services that ordinary Canadians depend on, and this government isn't ready to own the details of that yet. We're talking about getting pushed into a rushed mass deployment of AI into critical government operations by a profit-motivated tech lobby, without the checks and balances in place to make sure that it doesn't cost us more than it saves. And frankly, despite all the promises otherwise, we're probably talking about the same old shell game of cutting public sector jobs for cheap optics only to see consultants pick up the slack, billing taxpayers 25% more for the same work while we bleed out our national institutional memory. We're a union that's made up mainly of economists, and we despise seeing inefficiencies build up and big opportunities get missed. And there are real solutions to cut government operating costs, but gutting your workforce while making massive new commitments to Canadians is not one of them. The fact that remote work for public servants was not even considered as an opportunity here, which means we could save almost the exact same amount of money they very dubiously claim we'll save with job cuts on real estate costs instead, while converting our offices into housing, means this is just an ideological attack on the public service exactly when we need it most. There are human costs to these ideological games, and public servants are tired of being scapegoated. We expect all parties to come together and propose real and creative solutions that retain the hardworking public servants we've already invested in training up, take up actual opportunities to cut back on operating costs where it actually makes sense, like cutting our office costs in half, and attract more of Canada's best and brightest workers to the public service so we can get to work and face down the very, very real threats that our country is up against in these dark times. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Vivian Funk, and I'm the Vice President of Health and Safety with the Association of Justice Counsel, the AJC, representing more than 3,500 federal lawyers and prosecutors who make sure the laws of this country are applied fairly, transparently, and in the public interest. We don't just represent lawyers, we represent the integrity of Canada's justice system. Our members draft laws for Parliament. Our members defend Canada against legal claims that total $1 trillion at any given time. Our members are in court every day prosecuting serious crimes like drug trafficking and terrorism. In short, our members are on the front lines helping keep Canadians safe, strong, and free. But right now, that capacity is under attack. Our members have already faced job cuts, the cancellation of a crucial training program, and increasing caseloads without sufficient resources. The government promised new funding for the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. That support is nowhere to be found in this budget. The proposed early retirement incentive could accelerate the loss of experienced counsel, making programs like the LP1 training initiative even more essential to maintaining Canada's legal expertise. And this budget is asking that we cut even more over the next 3 years. These are not efficiency measures, they are the erosion of Canada's legal foundation. The rule of law is not an accounting line item. Having high quality and timely legal advice is essential to protecting Canada's interests at home and abroad. You can't deliver nation-building programs or protect Canadians if you cut the people who write, defend, and enforce our laws. You can't balance the books at the expense of the rule of law. A budget is more than numbers, it's a statement of priorities. If this government truly values accountability, fairness, and justice, it must invest in the people who uphold those principles every day. Justice is an integral part of our social safety net, not a discretionary service to downsize. Thank you.
I'm wondering, you had mentioned that you plan to, fight these cuts, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how you plan to do that exactly, and especially when the public service already lost about 10,000 people last year.
I know for PIPS, like I said in my remarks, I want us to be basically giving it to the MPs to their constituents. I want them to have real conversations about the services that's going to affect them, because I don't think MPs fully realize just how important the public service is in their communities. I look at, throughout this country, there are many of our members that are in those constituencies doing really good jobs for Canadians, and I think that I don't think MPs fully realize the impact it's going to have to their constituency, so we're going to be taking it right to them in the constituency.
En français, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur O'Reilly.
Notre plan, c'est d'avoir un impact direct des députés. On va parler directement aux députés de toutes les contractions dans son circonscription, et je pense que c'est important pour les citoyens dans ces places de parler avec son député sur le service qu'on dépense chaque journée.
About the proposed changes to the Federal Public Sector Labor Relations Act. What might those changes be and what impact might they have?
So what I can tell you is what's already in print, and that's vague, and that concerns me. Why would something like that be so vague? And so without a doubt, you better believe PSAC, along with our members and our legal team, will be looking at that legislation very closely. We have a right to strike. This is a constitutional right, and I'm very concerned based on the government's past actions when it comes to CPW, Canada Post, as well as the Air Canada flight attendants. I'm very concerned about how they've been treating bargaining, and so we will be looking at this very closely and looking at the legislation.
Answer the question about how your union plans to fight the job cuts?
Without a doubt, we will be speaking to every MP. We will be speaking in terms to the president of Treasury Board, because I really don't believe they understand the impact of what they're doing. No actual department or agency acts as a silo. They're all interconnected. To make a blanket statement of 40,000 people, where, at what level? It doesn't work that way. And so my concern more than ever is that there is no understanding about how government runs. And we are going to have to fight to make sure, not just in terms of the MPs, but the public as well, because they're the ones who are going to be losing those services. And it already started. Just look at Canada Revenue Agency, the call wait times that have been experienced. In fact, just last year, 10,000 positions were cut, term positions. And guess what? They had to rehire in various departments, including Canada Revenue Agency, because they can't sustain it. And this is a cyclical, I call it, it's like a magician, you know, sleight of hand. And at one point in time, you're saying, I'm saving money. But when you source different work out, you contract it out, it fails. Phoenix is a great example of the cost it's done. And we've spent over $5 billion and hiring up compensation advisors to fix that system. And so we're just seeing the same pattern of behavior without looking at the federal public service and the safety net it provides those who live in Canada. And to me, that's who's going to be hurt. Oui, go ahead.
Okay.
Sky,
I'm just curious, quick. Just curious about that amendments to the Public Service Act. I've heard that it could be arbitration, taking in the fiscal position, going into arbitration. I mean, can you just give me a sense of what happened there in terms of, you know, did you see that in the budget? Was that a curveball? And if it is in fact arbitration where the fiscal position of Canada has to be taken into account through an arbiter, how does that impact future collective agreements?
Well, there's a couple of pieces there. You have a government who's also an employer. And if you're going to set the budget, that means that you can even shrink the budget so that there is fiscal constraint. How is that fair? How is that transparent? As far as I'm concerned, that goes against our constitutional rights. Oui.
Je vais peut-être enchaîner avec le même sujet d'abord, mais j'ai quelques questions. Justement, par rapport à ces modifications au processus d'arbitrage, comment vous comptez vous opposer à ce que le gouvernement veut modifier et mettre en place, notamment au niveau du salaire, lorsqu'il est question d'arbitrage?
Ben, premièrement, comme que Sharon vient de dire, c'est très vague. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a dans le budget? C'est pas clair qu'est-ce qui compte de changer. Mais une chose certaine, on va s'assurer que le langage dans nos conventions collectives est respecté. M. Carney a peut-être pas beaucoup d'expérience à travailler avec des syndicats ou opérer dans un monde syndical, mais il va l'apprendre vite. Les droits syndicaux, les droits des travailleuses et travailleurs sont une pierre angulaire à la société canadienne. C'est pas vrai qu'on va tourner comme les États-Unis. Puis avec toute son rhétorique de elbows up, les coudes levés là, pendant les élections, ça c'est passé où? Parce que présentement, il est en train de démolir la fonction publique fédérale. Puis s'il pense s'attaquer aux droits des travailleurs, aux droits des syndicats, on va lutter avec tout ce qu'on peut pour contrer ça puis protéger nos droits. Mais pour l'instant, on n'a pas de détails. Donc, on se demande aussi qu'est-ce exactement qu'il planifie de faire.
Donc, les recours légaux, ça serait envisageable?
Les recours légaux, puis aussi de protéger le langage dans la convention collective. On a un contrat avec l'employeur, puis on s'entend qu'il va le respecter.
Voyez-vous les prochains mois, parce qu'on est dans une période de renouvellement de conventions collectives, puis il y a tous ces changements-là, les compressions qui s'en viennent et tout ça. Comment vous anticipez les prochains mois dans vos relations avec le gouvernement?
C'est sûr qu'on commence pas bien. Hein? Depuis l'élection, on voit un différent côté de M. Carney. Pendant l'élection, il se présentait comme un leader libéral, puis tout d'un coup, il est devenu un leader conservateur, on dirait. Donc, ça commence pas bien, mais c'est sûr que c'est nous, quelconque le parti au pouvoir, quelconque le premier ministre, à la table de négociation, dans les réunions interpatronales, dans le processus de greffe, dans le milieu de travail et dans les rues, on va se battre pour protéger les droits de nos membres.
Concernant la retraite anticipée, ça peut être perçu comme une avenue intéressante pour certains fonctionnaires qui ont 50, 55 ans, mais c'est financé à même la caisse de retraite de la fonction publique fédérale. Qu'est-ce que vous allez dire à vos membres? Est-ce que vous allez les encourager à prendre leur retraite avec cet argent qui a été donné par tous, ou vous allez leur dire non, prenez pas ça, c'est pas correct, c'est pas respectueux pour l'ensemble des travailleurs?
Ça va être à chacun son choix, mais je dirais que dans les fonds de retraite, il y a le gouvernement aurait pu faire quelque chose de bien meilleur, d'éliminer le programme de pension à 2 vitesses. Ça aurait été plus équitable. Pour ce qui en est des retraites tôt, je suis pas du tout d'accord sur une solution acceptable. 2 raisons principalement. De un, imagine que tu travailles dans la fonction publique fédérale 20, 30 ans, tu as dévoué ta carrière, ta vie à la fonction publique fédérale, puis en bout de ligne, on te dit « bye-bye, tu peux t'en aller tôt », puis on va même pas te remplacer parce que c'est le même qu'on te dévalorise. Donc, c'est un manque de respect envers le travail que les fonctionnaires ont effectué pendant leur carrière. Puis de 2, quand ce job-là disparaît, on ne la remplace plus, elle disparaît. Donc, c'est le fardeau de travail va être placé sur les autres travailleurs qui restent. C'est une réduction de services à la population. Puis aussi, c'est une réduction d'opportunités de travail pour la prochaine génération de travailleurs.
J'ai une dernière question pour vous, M. Silas. Évidemment, on ne sait pas où on va couper, ce n'est pas écrit noir sur blanc dans le budget, mais vous, quand vous regardez les colonnes de chiffres, la baisse du financement dans chacun des ministères, selon vous, quels sont les secteurs, les ministères ou les départements qui sont les plus à risque d'avoir les plus grosses compressions? Quelle est votre perception des choses?
J'ai pas une perception spécifique sur quel ministère va être atteint, mais je pense que l'ensemble de la fonction publique fédérale est importante. Ça ne travaille pas en silo. C'est un système qui marche tout ensemble. Puis il faut investir et renforcer tous les ministères et agences de la fonction publique fédérale et non la couper parce que c'est comme ça qu'on soutient la population en bon temps, en mauvais temps.
Et M. Prier, à ce sujet-là, vous, vos craintes sont de voir des coupes dans quel secteur, dans quel ministère?
Comme Alex, il faut qu'on étudie toujours le budget qui était proposé hier. Il faut qu'on étudie exactement où on va trouver ces compressions. Je pense que le gouvernement a omis tous ces faits dans le budget, spécifiquement pour qu'ils ne puissent pas l'annoncer sur le jour de l'annoncement du budget. Donc, ils veulent le dérouler d'une manière très longue. Ils veulent cacher ces compressions. Ils ne veulent pas qu'il y ait un régissement du média, de la public, contre les compressions qui vont impacter la vie et la qualité de vie des Canadiens ordinaires. I just wanted to speak too about the changes to the federal public sector Labor Relations Act and considering the government's fiscal situation as well. So, like I said, public servants are not responsible for the deficit. Public servants are running at a level of efficiency that we have not seen in a long time. 10% of the operating budget under the Trudeau government, 14% of the operating budget under Harper. We're getting more efficient, if anything. There's work to be done for this country. We're in a national crisis right now. Desperate work needs to be done, and we need to have the best and the brightest there to do that work. And so if the government wants to start considering its own fiscal crisis that it itself generated, then we are not going to accept that as a basis for worsening our conditions. And we're going to be speaking to our members, as we have for the whole summer in the build-up to this budget, to connect with those Canadians as we start uncovering what these cuts actually mean. We start going department by department and figuring out exactly what's being cut and what is being taken away from Canadians. Ordinary Canadians are going to be impacted by these cuts in dramatic ways. It's not just public servants losing their jobs. That is a terrible thing to be doing in the middle of an unemployment crisis. But at the same time, we're talking about worsening services for Canadians or outright taking things away from ordinary Canadians. And we plan on connecting with them and the organizations that represent them, depending on the sector, as we have been for the past 6 months. We need to build a very large coalition here to oppose ideological austerity. This isn't simple belt tightening. You know, balancing the budget can be a cute euphemism sometimes, but what it meant in the 90s under a Liberal government as well was devastating the infrastructure that keeps this country strong. And we are in the middle of a crisis right now. We cannot afford these games, and we will be moving forward on that. But as far as the FPS LRA goes and the changes to it, this is a sign, just like Mark Carney gave us a sign when he ordered flight attendants back to work, that these rights are fought for and they are defended. And the QP flight attendants that were able to stand him down gave us an example of exactly the level of organization and solidarity that we are going to need to face down a prime minister who is ready to trample labor rights in their entirety.
I have some questions for Larry. You represent lots of different types of unions, and the budget does include commitment for infrastructure funding tied to union labor. My question for you is, would CLC recommend the NDP MPs vote in favor of this budget?
That is a question that is more appropriately addressed to the NDP. We are nonpartisan, basically. I mean, we have tons of support within the labor movement for the NDP, as we have support for the Liberals as for the Conservatives. So that is a decision that the NDP will have to make. As far as we are concerned, as far as the Canadian Labour Congress is concerned, The points we have made today are exactly the points that we are going to be telling our members across the country. An attack against one is an attack against all. When you talk about changing the Public Service Labor Relations Act, we at the Congress take that very seriously. We see what's happening in Quebec. We see what's happening in Alberta. If you try to legislate and impose compensation and wages and benefits on employees instead of getting that at the negotiating table, we had that conversation 60 years ago when the Civil Service Commission of Canada said determining wage and compensation and benefits paternalistically by the Treasury Board is not the way to go. We need to allow the associations and the unions to determine that at the bargaining table. So we will defend that across the board because the federal government is giving the cue to the provincial governments. Once you start at the national level, then you're telling all the provincial governments, what we're doing is fine, go ahead as well. We will stand in solidarity, and we will make sure that what we saw at CUPE, what we saw was happening in Ontario, as well as Saskatchewan, what's happening now in Alberta, we will stand in solidarity with our public sector affiliates.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
Alors, écoutez, quand nous voyons qu'on veut modifier la loi sur les relations de travail dans la fonction publique pour déterminer puis établir ce qui est la compensation dans la fonction publique fédérale, nous avons déjà vu dans le passé ce disque joué. Et ça a été réglé dans les années 60, quand la Commission de service civil avait reconnu à l'époque que d'établir la compensation pour les fonctionnaires fédéraux de façon paternaliste et autoritaire n'allait pas dans le bon sens. Il fallait laisser aux associations et aux syndicats le libre choix à la table de négocier ce qui doit être négocié à la table. C'est là qu'on a les meilleures ententes. Le son de cloche que le gouvernement fédéral est en train de donner avec cette mention dans le budget, ça veut dire que les provinces seront les prochains à dire « le fédéral le fait, nous le ferons ». Et ça, le Congrès du travail, on dira « non, absolument pas ». On se tiendra en solidarité avec les travailleurs et travailleuses au fédéral parce que ça risque de se trouver à travers le pays. D'accord? Oui.
Okay, so I just want to follow up because I understand that you're independent of the NDP, but the NDP consults with you, has meetings with you. There is a deep relationship there. So what would you like to see the NDP do in this moment?
The NDP has always been known as the Workers' Party, so we know that the NDP, as they have done in the past and as they probably will do now, is defend workers' rights. And that's what we expect to see. We don't expect to see any change in that regard. But that question can be directed to the leader.
Do you have any concerns about the federal government's intention to reduce immigration levels?
Of course we do. Of course we do. This country was built on immigration. We find it absolutely reprehensible that for political purposes that we are not recognizing that the economy of this country always benefits. Show me where in the past that the economy of this country did not benefit from welcoming immigrants. The more immigrants we welcome, the more this country prospers. And Mr. Carney, as an economist, knows that. This is a political sop to intolerance, to people who are saying that the problems I am experiencing is because of the other. We know that when we stand together, we can do so much more. And that's what the Congress will have as its message. We must have workers in this country if we are going to build this country. If we are not having the demographic change from within, then we must get that from without.
I know remote work was mentioned. I'm wondering if any of you have any indication about whether the rules around how often public servants have to be in the office are going to change, if that's something any of you have any idea of.
We have never been fully informed on return to office, whether it was when we went 2 days a week to 3 days a week. My biggest concern with return to office is that we haven't had discussions about flexible work. You know, the studies are out there. They show that public servants are more productive, and everyone is more productive that when there is that flexibility in work. you know, to force people into the office to sit on Teams meetings all day is not an effective way for the public service to operate. And I think the government has never had meaningful consultation with us on RTO, and even in this case, we do not have the details yet, aside from the brief mentions in the budget, because we're asking the same questions. Well, what does that mean?
I can speak to that a bit. This government is a black box on that question. That's a very interesting thing to note in the conversation about government efficiency. One of the single biggest efficiency gains in terms of savings and in terms of worker productivity. Statistics Canada showed that during this unplanned remote work experiment that was the start of the pandemic, public servants were about 5% more productive. So what we're talking about right now is talking about the sacrifices that Canadians need to make, about all the jobs and the programs that are going to be cut. And something that could save billions upon billions of dollars a year while making public servants more productive isn't even part of the conversation. I would ask you to ask this government directly, what is your position now on remote work? I know there's been return to office orders 5 days a week for Ontario public servants. All the big banks are ordering their workers 5 days a week. Some cities are doing that too. We know from recent studies by Angus Reid, by others, that most Canadian workers that can work remotely want to at least have the flexibility to work remotely. And this should be a conversation not just from the sense of worker productivity and worker well-being, but fiscal responsibility. But like I said, this conversation around efficiency, just like the DOGE conversation in the US, is more of an ideological attack on workers, on unions, on the quality of life of ordinary Canadians, than it is a serious conversation about tightening our belts at a tough time. So I would ask you to put that question back to this government. What is your position on remote work, and could this be considered an opportunity for significant savings in the middle of a fiscal crisis that you yourself have generated with your tax cuts for the rich?
Question about the expenditure review. We saw in the budget that a few more departments are being added to the list that only define 2% savings, like wage and Indigenous Services Canada. What do you think about that list growing?
I think that shows the power of solidarity. I think every feminist organization in the country, along with all of my union siblings behind us, completely opposed the cuts to women and gender equality that would have rolled us back to the 80s in terms of where we are in terms of advancing gender equity, LGBTQ rights, and many other things. But we saw every feminist organization in the country and every union speak to their MPs and really force this government to make a call on this. And this is why I think they buried a lot of these cuts in the details, which they did not share with the Canadian public right now. Canadians do not have an appetite for austerity. It's been 40 years of the same nonsense. We are not a government for the oligarchs. We are a government for our people right now, and it is time to invest in things that improve ordinary people's lives. But on those cuts at wage in particular, I think the fact that this was being perceived as a major attack on women's rights, on gender rights, on LGBTQ rights, forced the government to change tack on this. And I think there's a lot of other opportunities. If communities impacted by these cuts come together with the workers who are working every day to deliver services and programs to Canadians, come together, we can force their hand on this and force changes that are necessary. We think that this is more of an ideological austerity budget than a necessary set of moves to achieve fiscal discipline. And like I said, tax cuts for the rich are the #1 driver of this deficit. We have serious challenges in this country. We need qualified people, and our best and the brightest working to solve them.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci. C'est ce qui conclut cette conférence de presse.
No problem. Thank you.
Well done. Great job. Yeah, great job.